Okay. So, in other words, you are not going to be able to do anything as the ANC without the approval of the DA. And I'm saying that because if 60%, because this document says where consensus is not possible, the principle of sufficient consensus must apply. Sufficient consensus exists when parties representing 60% of the seats in the National Assembly agree, as you've stated. So you already have 40%, the DA has 20%. You could very well put up a position in cabinet, for instance, where the IFP agree with you, the PA, the PAC, Good Party agrees with you, but that's not enough for you to pass that. You are still going to need the approval of the Democratic Alliance for the decisions that you make.
No, consensus and sufficient consensus is a deadlock breaking mechanism where there is an issue on the table and there is no agreement. But it does not in itself hamstring the functioning of cabinet in terms of decision making. That is an understanding in terms of the statement of intent among political parties that for the goodwill and the smooth running and stability of the country, we will then look at matters from a point of view of deadlock breaking mechanism through a consensus or sufficient consensus. And sufficient consensus will only be reached after engagement, and that is it. So it is not about subjecting yourself and the DA vetoing cabinet. It is unconstitutional in a sense, unless if it is entrenched in the Constitution. The state of intent determines how you function smoothly. Remember, the foundational principle overarching, among others, talks about stability, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. So we're not replacing the Constitution. So in this particular instance, for the goodwill and the best and the good way of functioning of government, yes, you can come with issues and all of that, but if there is no agreement on some of the issues, then we will go through the route of sufficient consensus in terms of reaching a decision. So nobody vetoes the decisions of cabinet. Okay, cabinet will still take its own decisions. But that decision of cabinet is taken based on the consensus of the parties in the government of national unity, right? Your majority as the ANC, because you don't have that anymore. And the fact that you've got the highest number of votes and you have 40% doesn't mean that if there was a disagreement, you can still go ahead and say this is a decision of cabinet. You still need the buy-in of the other parties in the GNU. It is a deadlock breaking mechanism. And that is what I'm explaining. So it means a cabinet decision in itself cannot be vetoed by any other party. It means that political parties will debate, and the reflection of that discussion in the GNU will be taken by sufficient consensus. But how do we reach that decision? So when you say a decision by cabinet, how do we reach it? Is it when you say, all right, 60% of us agree here, so that means that qualifies as a decision of cabinet? That is the threshold we're actually talking about in terms of, it's a concession in this particular instance. And what it means is that 60% of political parties in the GNU will arrive at a decision and use sufficient consensus as a deadlock breaking mechanism should any of such arise. Yes, and that's the point I'm making, that for it to be a decision, 60%, if there's no consensus, have to agree to that. You don't have that 60% with the IFP, the Good Party, the PAC. You need the DA to rubber stamp every time that there's a deadlock. For there to be 60% consensus, you need the DA to rubber stamp that. Without their numbers, you can't have a legitimate decision that you say this is a result of sufficient consensus. No, it is incorrect. Cabinet does not function on the basis outside the realm of the constitutional prescript. And the question of goodwill in terms of functioning and smooth functioning and putting together the GNU government, it means where there are contradictions and issues that need to be resolved will be resolved by sufficient consensus. And in this particular instance, it does not mean that in the normal functioning of cabinet, from the point of view of how the executive has to function, it ceases to operate. We are talking about a concession in relation to how you break a deadlock, should there be any, where decisions have got to be taken. Okay, let's be practical as my last question, because I want us to be clear and understand you well here. If, as the
as the government of the government of national unity, you're working on a statement, you're discussing what's happening in the Middle East. You believe as the ANC that you must characterize as cabinet what's happening in the Middle East as genocide. The Democratic Alliance, with their 20% in that cabinet, say we don't agree with that. That's a deadlock, right? So for you, for the president to come out and say this is an approved cabinet decision and I'm communicating it, when there has been a deadlock where the ANC says it's a genocide in the Middle East, the DA says it is not. Are you saying that even when the DA has said no with their 40%, the president can still come out and take that decision as sufficient and having been agreed by the collective, and it's still a legitimate decision that is reached to after consensus?
We are not talking about a negotiated political settlement here. We have long moved out of that. This is a GNU with special characteristics, in which we talk about the normal operation and functioning of government, which in itself is not hamstrung by the fact that for every cabinet member and decision to be taken, it will at all material times be subjected to disagreement. So the question is, should that actually arise, determined by the number of political parties that are there that participate? We have then put the question of sufficient consensus to arrive at the decision.
I agree with you, which is why in the beginning I didn't say every single cabinet decision. Of course, let's say 80% or 90% of the times you guys are going to agree. But the reality is there are policy differences, which is why I'm using the national minimum wage for a reason. I'm using the war in the Middle East for a reason, because that's where you don't see eye to eye. So in that 1 or 5% where you have fundamental differences in policy, how do you deal with it? That's
the minimum wage cannot be reversed.
Yeah, but that's it. I'm saying, what if you want to increase it by 1 rand? The DA doesn't believe in that.
The question is, there is no party that has got the veto power within the government of national unity. So for us to agree, it means that we put a threshold not of a single party. You must understand the 60% how it operates. Start with 50%, which would have included, if it was a grand coalition, 2 parties. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we have broadened that, reflective of the parties that are in the National Assembly to participate in the GNU, you have then raised the threshold to 60%. So it means of those parties that participate, that will determine broadly a bigger decision that needs to be taken within government.
And you as the ANC with 40%, let's say you've got the IFP, the DA, the PAC, the Good Party, that still doesn't give you 50%, does it? You need the DA. That's the point I'm trying to make.
It might as well happen that the DA disagrees, but I'm saying it does not have the veto power from not saying the decision cannot be taken. The threshold of 60% is of all the parties which will be participating.
And I'm saying you don't have the threshold of 60%. Put the DA aside. Take you, IFP, PAC, Good Party, PA. You don't have 50%. There's not much you can do on your own. At the end of the day, you are going to need the DA, even if it's just 10 members of the DA. You're going to need them in order to deal with any deadlock that you may have.
When you constitute government and you talk about 60% and political parties broadly that participate, the determination of the decisions, how they are taken in terms of cabinet, at the end of the day, should there be any other deadlock with regard to the executive, the deadlock breaking mechanism at your disposal is to negotiate and engage in a sufficient consensus. But it does not apply in terms of decision making such that a party can have a veto power over the executive decision making process. The question that must be interrogated, which is what I think you are in a hurry to make a determination about the DA having veto powers, is that a single political party cannot stop the operations of the executive in this, unless institutionalized and reflected in the constitution of the country that that veto power, it is acceptable.
And the executive is the government of national unity, it's not the ANC, right?
The government of national unity is of all parties that participate.
Which is why you need an agreement. So as the ANC, when you say you can't stop the operations of the executive is not the ANC. The executive is the government of national unity. That's why those people need to agree. At the very least, 60% of them must agree. So but let's move on from it. I'm going to bring in Helen Ziller, because Helen Ziller actually told me that the ANC is not going to be able to do anything without 60%. They have 20%, you have 40%. The document you have signed says if there's a deadlock, at least 60% of parties must agree. And unfortunately for you as the ANC, the IFP, the Good Party, the PA, all the other smaller parties don't give you 60%. At the end of the day, you need the DA to come and rubber stamp whatever decision you're going to make. That's what's according to the document you've signed.
No, I think the interpretation of the decision, also in terms of our discussion, is what need to be clarified.
Okay.
And that is what is important.
All right. We'll hear from Helen Ziller in a moment about how they interpret that. Let's talk about the alliance partners. The SACP Solima Paila was seated here 2 weeks ago, and he said if the ANC goes into this agreement or partnership with the Democratic Alliance and the other parties, they are going to review the relationship that they have with you as the ANC in the alliance. Where's their position now? Have you lost them completely?
No, we have not lost anybody. We're still an alliance because, quite frankly, the GNU in itself, it is a leap forward in relation to a solution which is born out of the outcome of the election. And everybody understands that. In itself, it is not something that defines an alliance between the ANC beyond the Communist Party and the SACP with another opponent, which is the Democratic Alliance.
So what, do you think it was just a mere cold threat they were making that they'll review that relationship?
Of course, they've got the right to raise that particular point, which is fundamental, which is what the ANC has not gravitated towards, which others have peddled as an alignment with the Democratic Alliance or working or cooperating with the Democratic Alliance. We are working with all parties that seek to participate within the JNU, and that include the Democratic Alliance as a reflection of the outcome of the election.
What do you say to people who may not have the necessary context around why you're not working with the EFF or the MK? What's your explanation to our viewers tonight about why in this government of national unity, the MK party or the EFF are not even represented?
It is not our choosing. That question must be directed to them.
What attempts have you made? I want you to explain to our viewers what you've tried to do as the ANC.
We didn't put terms. We addressed all political parties. We met them in the talks about talks. We met them individually. And we had 5 options. We had 4 options. The first option was coalition, grand coalition with political parties. The second one was minority government. The third one was GNU. The fourth one was backbench, going to the benches. That was out simply because 6 million people have said to us we must continue to participate and to lead. And then the minority government and the grand coalition were eliminated in favor of one option, which is GNU, that brings everybody on board to participate. First, to address what? National interest. And South Africa first. That has been the key word in relation to our position on GNU, and that is what is important. So they said, we don't want GNU, we want grand coalition with you, one party or two to participate, and that is it. And we said that it then is not reflective and what we are advancing in terms of what the elections have told us.
Yeah, the EFF leader just the other time said that he was on a phone with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Did he call the president, or did the president call him and perhaps other leaders of other parties to try and negotiate?
Well, to my knowledge, I don't think the president called him. I think they called him, and that's not an issue for us to brag about. The fact of the matter is that the ANC constitute a bigger, important part of the outcome of the elections, albeit with not overwhelming majority. So we listen to political parties. So to us, it is a non-issue who called first, but political parties.
That was just to establish if the president also called, for instance, Jacob Zuma as the leader of the MK party to try and see.
There was a
way
process
to bring
that
in
was set in motion. We engaged with Jacob Zuma's party, and we engaged with the EFF, and we engaged with the DA, we engaged with the IFP, and that is what we have done. So should those political parties deem it fit that they want to elevate matters to at the macro political level, they are allowed. Like EFF leader have engaged with the president, and then DA leader have engaged with the president, IFP, and all other leaders, as I'm talking to you now, even beyond the inauguration, will be engaging with the president.
All right,
that is allowed.
Lastly, as we let you go, Mr. Mbalula, the Freedom Front Plus in the Northern Cape were saying that the re-election of Zamani Saul as the premier paves the way for their request for the consideration of the status of Orania. Is this true? Is the Secretary General of the ANC?
No, that is not on our agenda. We've got 49% result in the Northern Cape.
They voted with Zamani Saul.
Yes, they voted. They voted with Zamani Saul, and then there is no such agreement about paving way for the state of Orania.
Would you entertain that?
We wouldn't entertain anything of that sort, but talking to people and their interest, it is in the DNA of the ANC. Without compromising our principle, we are advocating for a non-racial, democratic, non-sexist South Africa where all people participate. And in this particular instance, we don't advocate for cessation and at the same time for Orania. Orania have existed within the Northern Cape, but given the nature of our state, we have been very tolerant to that, and they've coexisted with us within the democratic state.
But you wouldn't entertain their call for this to be constitutionally recognized?
It doesn't represent us.
Yeah.
So the question of entertaining, I don't know what it means, but I'm saying to you, it's not about entertaining. It doesn't represent who we are.
Yeah, so if the question is, if they brought it to you as the ANC, you draw the line, is that we're not going to do that.
When it comes to the table, we will make our position known to them. All what I'm saying is that we don't close doors to people because they have all of these sort of ideas, but if they bring them to us, we will make our position known to them, which they've known, for who we are, what we stand for in terms of our character as a party, and the state we are building in terms of what we stand for and constitutionality of South Africa.